Hi everyone. Today's video is going to be about chapter 7 of Night. So at the end of chapter 6, Eleazar and his father had survived the death marches and they had been left at the concentration camp Gleiwitz, which is sort of on the border between Poland and Germany. And they are now on a train and they believe they are being sent closer to the center of Germany, but they are not exactly sure where. And again, the Nazis were sending them away from the fighting to try to sort of keep these prisoners almost as hostages or so that they could continue to use their labor. But a lot of people have died on the death marches. And as you'll know, if you already read chapter 7, this train ride that Eleazar and his father are on right now is also going to be quite deadly. So this is another chapter that I think is kind of intense to read. But again, I think it's important for us to read this story because, again, as I said when we started the book, it's important for us to kind of know exactly what happened during the Holocaust, because we don't want to forget that all of these people had to go through these terrible things. All right, so I'm just going to briefly go through the most important quotes in chapter 7. At least according to me, but you can decide for yourself what you think one important quote is and respond to it with your journal entry. So again, just one journal entry for chapter 7 because it is only 3 pages. All right, so again, Eleazar and his father are on a train. There are 100 people in their train car, and the way Eleazar is describing it, everybody is sort of piled on top of each other, which is probably helping them keep warm because it is an open train car and it is still snowing. So again, Eleazar can't even tell who is alive and dead at this point. He says there's no difference. And then again, we know that Eleazar is still struggling with kind of wanting to stay alive or not. He says there's no more reason to live, no more reason to struggle. And then occasionally the train will stop and the SS officers and Nazis will say to throw all the dead off of the train. All right, so again, the people who are still alive were actually happy about this, that corpses were being thrown out of their train car so that there would be more room for the survivors. So the first time this happens, a few people think that Eleazar's father has died, and Eleazar is not sure himself if his father is alive, so he tries to wake him up before he can be thrown out of the train, and it turns out that his father is still alive. So he says, after a moment, my father's eyelids moved slightly, and he was breathing weakly. So he is still alive for now, but as we know, he is going to die before the end of the book because Eleazar told us himself in the first chapter. All right, so Eleazar says 20 bodies were thrown out of their wagon on that first stop, and they left behind the naked, dead, deprived of burial in a deep snow in a field in Poland. So again, that sort of image really sort of sticks with you. All right. On to page 54, Eleazar says we were no more than frozen bodies. So it's sort of repeating this idea of they don't even feel human anymore. We learned that they end up traveling for 10 days from Gleiwitz. And Eleazar says that they are not given any food by the SS. They survive by just eating the snow. But then occasionally they will stop in certain towns in Germany and a workman will throw a piece of bread into their wagon. However, obviously there are dozens and dozens of starving people in each wagon, so that's not really going to feed all of them. And this ends up creating some fights among these starving people, these prisoners. And this next part on page 54, this is again kind of the future Eleazar reflecting back on like a similar time in the Holocaust as something in his current life. So he's saying that like kind of in the future after he survived the Holocaust many years later, he was at this sort of resort and passengers were throwing coins to the natives And again, there were two children engaged in a death struggle trying to strangle each other for these coins. And this kind of rich lady from Paris, she says, oh, but I like giving to charity. So Eliezer says it's kind of the same concept. It's like, it's not really a very charitable thing to do to make people fight over what little you are willing to give them, when it's not really you trying to be nice. It's almost more for your own entertainment. So Eliezer is saying back in the wagon, when these little bits of bread are being thrown in, again, these prisoners are savagely fighting each other for these tiny little bits of bread. So this is, again, kind of expanding on that idea of they're almost acting more like animals because they've been so tortured and starved. They almost have lost their humanity. All right. So then Eliezer says that a piece of bread has fallen into their wagon, but he decides not to fight for it. But what he does witness is a young man killing his own father for a bit of bread. So again, this boy's father had gotten a piece of bread from the fights, and then his son essentially killed him for it and ended up dead himself. So this image on page 54 where it says, again, they were two corpses side by side, father and son, clearly sort of sticks with Eliezer. So whenever he sees another like pair of fathers and sons like him and his father, it's almost kind of a comparing and contrasting that he is doing with the other pairs. Okay, and then this line kind of stands out to me. He says I was 15 years old, just to kind of show us like how young he is to be experiencing these horrible things that he is witnessing. All right, and then on to the last page of chapter 7, page 55. Eliezer randomly has somebody in the train car who tries to strangle him, and Eliezer's father is able to get free with the help of a friend. But then this friend, Meyer Katz, he again feels that he is now cracking up and at the end of his tether. So this train ride is almost the worst thing he has experienced throughout all of his time in the concentration camps, even though he had lost his son and probably seen other horrible things. It's this train ride that he cannot kind of go through. All right. And then towards the end of the chapter, Eliezer says that, again, the men on the train kind of just begin to like let out the cries of wounded animals, and soon everybody in their train car and throughout the entire train are just like letting out these like kind of animalistic noises because they're suffering so much. And even Eliezer's father friend asks, why don't they just shoot us all? So again, most people at this point are sort of wishing for death rather than having to endure this torture of freezing and starving. All right. So then finally, they reach their destination in Germany, which is called Buchenwald. And this is the last concentration camp that Eliezer and his father will be at. I will show you it on the map in just a moment. But then this detail is really crazy to me. So 100 people had gotten onto Eliezer's train car, but only 12, a dozen of them got out. So Eliezer and his father were among the 12 people that survived that 10-day train journey. So the rest of the people either died fighting for the bread, they froze to death, they starved to death, or they just died of exhaustion. So it's almost weird to say that they were the lucky ones to survive, because again, at this point, they're not sure that they want to survive. It might almost be easier to die. All right, so again, chapter 7, quite intense, but now they are at their next and last concentration camp, Buchenwald. So I'll go ahead and show you on the map where they're at. And again, unfortunately, 3 of the concentration camps I go to all start with a B, so it can be kind of confusing. But so remember, Gleiwitz is where they had gotten onto the train after they did this death march in between Buna and Gleiwitz. And that 10-day train journey took them all the way over here in more of central Germany to this concentration camp, Buchenwald. All right, so the next 2 days, we will be reading chapters 8 and 9. And as you might be able to predict, the war is almost over. So chapters 8 and 9 will focus on the end of the war and Eliezer's father's death, because we know that it is coming. All right, again, you know that I'm here if you have any questions on your reading, and I will talk to you all tomorrow. Bye.